Well, thank you for joining us again. My name is Brian Cordes here with Nicolette Harper. Nicolette, can you just tell us a little bit about your role at Marriott?
Yeah.
And fun fact, Marriott, it's not Marriott, Marriott like chariot.
Exactly. I learned that on my first day on the job. I'm like, we've got some branding issues to deal with. But yeah, apparently it's pronounced that way. So simplest thing, anybody spending a single dollar of advertising at Marriott, you see an ad on a billboard, NFL, whatever, Olympics, and all that sort of thing, a billboard anywhere in the world that comes through my group. Shortest thing is I'm just trying to anybody who's spending any of that money just to be really good at it, whether it's like a mom and pop hotel to, one of our, big portfolio campaigns that we do with Olympics or sports or F1 and what have you. So all brands, all markets, all languages. So just a little job.
Amazing. And a brand that obviously we probably have so many people here today that are staying at Marriott Hotel.
Bonvoy members.
Right?
Who's a Bonvoy
members.
member?
The point, we got a big one, I know, Drew Groner. So we wanted, I thought, I've been able to hang out with Nicolette before, and one of the cool things she told me about one time, she hosts these Hot Ones parties. Anyone seen the show Hot Ones on YouTube? It's great. It's like Justin Timberlake, Margot Robbie, various other people. Actually went to see Justin Timberlake last night.
Saw him last night.
Can you tell us a little about this party though? Because it's a fun idea.
Okay, so we have a lot of friends that like a lot of heat and a lot of spice from all over. And we've been watching the Hot Ones. It was still pretty early, a couple of years ago, I guess. And we're like, you know what? Can we even order these sauces? So you apparently can order them from the company. They ship it to you. We kept the show or whatever kind of going in the background just for sake or whatever. And then we just started tossing the wings. So we learned the hard way that you should not use boneless wings because all that breading just soaks up all the sauce. So that was pretty brutal the first time that we did it. And then, so we learned a lesson to just the bone-in style. But there was only 2 people that made it to the end, both from India, loved the spice. And the rest of us were drinking grasshoppers and like... So, but it was fun. It's a thing.
Yeah, I've always wanted to try it. We actually have a surprise. Could we bring out the wings? Just kidding. So, I think we all love the Marriott brand and Bonvoy. It touches us. But I think from a media perspective, it's complicated. It's 30 plus brands, global. How do you think about product and like the individual brands like a Ritz or Westin or Fairfield versus the broader brand or loyalty program of Bonvoy, and how does that influence your overall strategy at a high level?
The struggle is real. So we like to buy a lot of companies just so we can be bigger than Hilton. I don't know if there's anybody in Hilton here, sorry. But truth be told, we're buying all these different companies. They're totally different, from yachts to retail to different kinds of levels, from luxury on down. Most people don't even know that like St. Regis and W and Westin are part of Marriott, let alone these like 10 new brands that we just bought. So it's the biggest struggle is trying to let everybody in the world know that these even exist. They're part of Marriott Bonvoy, and Marriott Bonvoy is not just the loyalty program. It's kind of, think of it like NASDAQ. It's our portfolio of assets. Anything you want to do, we've got it kind of thing, experiences and all that. And so that's really hard. But the challenge is we have all these different brands, and some of them, although they look different on the outside, they're really the same audience. And so when you're trying to go to market and you're like, okay, well, Courtyard and Moxie, they physically look different and have different value props, but it's really the same customer that's staying in both of them. So you can't run them at the same time because you're cannibalizing yourself. And so how do you create those swim lanes? Sometimes it's time-bound, run Courtyard during NFL and Moxie later. Sometimes it's you got to create swim lanes for channels and partners. One's doing maybe linear and the other's social. You can do it that way. You can do it through audiences and suppress or promote different audiences in order to drive that through. But it's a real challenge. Some companies do it well because they just underwrite everything. That is probably one of the things that Hilton does well, is they have by Hilton on like all their brands, versus we're trying to let each one kind of shine individually. And so it becomes really challenging. So now we're kind of moving into different territories where if we know that you're a family traveler, you like pets, or you're solo, or whatever your thing is and your passion is, to really rally around that. And so that might mean there's a couple brands that kind of fit that category, and you start grouping those together and filming those together for the commercials, which is a little different than how we work today. Everybody has their, brand, and they're very protective of it. But then when you're talking about global, well, that's like almost impossible, because Courtyard and Moxie might be big here, but they don't exist in some of the other markets. So you can't shoot a global commercial because there's not enough of those brands everywhere. So it becomes really, really hard. And so we kind of break it down to its concept, to where they could, in China, could go shoot the whole thing themselves with the brands that are relevant for them, but in a way that has this underlying chassis that connects everything together.
Got it. So
sorry, that was really long.
It's a really good answer, though. I mean, it's very interesting, and I think we talk about challenges, and I bringing this back into the more of the media landscape. I think that you're trying to reach various different audiences. I think we as consumers are consuming content in so many different ways, but we all have all the streaming services. We know that a lot of people are paying to not get ads on them. We've got free TV services that are showing ads. DIRECTV, we're kind of in the middle, where it's more of a premium that you're paying for, but you're getting ads. Mm-hmm. How are you approaching that? Because there's a consumer view of like, okay, yes, everything's moving to streaming, which I'm not doubting, but from an advertising point of view, it's like so many of those options, yeah, people have the streaming service, but the majority of those people aren't getting ads on that streaming service, so how are you thinking about that from a media perspective?
So this is an interesting one. So I have bought more linear recently than I've ever bought in like many, many years, for this exact reason. I would say this year is probably the first year we didn't really buy CTV in upfronts, because there's so many of them, and the inventory is just flooded. You can't possibly sell that out. And then even on CTV, because you have so many services, you're like chasing the wind, because it's not like a moment in time like NFL, Super Bowl, where everybody's down and they're watching this moment. It's not like that in the Oscars and all these kinds of things. And even those moments are like half what they used to be. But when you're talking to CTV and people who have a Roku, but then they have an Apple TV, but then they're logging in DIRECTV, and they have all these different ways in, you're like, am I buying national? Is that local? Did they resell that? So it just gets really complicated. And so we pared a little bit down on the CTV piece, just because the inventory is just completely flooded the market. I think that'll change over time. I think we'll see consolidation for sure. Right now, it's not really there. But one of the things that we're looking at is pulling in all those CTV players into our clean room, because what we don't know is the audience overlap. If I'm buying Hulu and Disney and ESPN, do I really need these other ones, or vice versa even? And so those are some of the new use cases that we're bringing in. And so we can just be really smart about the money that we're spending, because we're not Coca-Cola. We don't have like endless budgets. And so it's a challenge, it's a problem. And especially even a lot of the new restrictions, cookie lists, is starting to kind of impact some of the TV space even, that you thought was gonna be like untouchable. So it's challenging times, but right now we're just trying to be picking a couple different streaming partners, a couple different TV partners and players, and just go really deep and heavy on that, so that we're not spreading ourselves too thin.
Yep. Yeah, it is complicated. I think from my seat, I work in really ad sales. I think I know our product really well. I try to keep up on the landscape, but from your perspective, you have to know so much about what all these companies are doing. Then you add in all the changes in ad tech, the cookieless future, if that ever happens, the clean rooms, like you said. How are you, in your teams, I should say, or how are you making sure that you and your teams stay educated on all of this?
So, look, I'll be honest, I've had to basically work with my team and upskill almost everything across the board. Gone are the days of like, I'm the paid search guy, I'm the TV guy. Like, you have to be able to know everything. Who thought like an advertising person would have to know about clean rooms and ID solutions and those kinds of things? Like, I wish I was a brand marketer some days, because then maybe I wouldn't have to know these things. But it gets really complicated and it's really difficult, and you have to have these hard conversations where it affects everything you do, even the enterprise partnership team. I'm like, you can't have that conversation with Starbucks until we have a conversation, because I'm going to need a second party data sharing agreement as part of that deal. And so it's just a really interesting dynamic, but if you don't understand that, you can't have that conversation. So I've built this entire training matrix for my team, not only upskilling in like the stuff they need for their job, ad tech, martech, and everything that goes along with it, but because it's gotten so complicated, I'm actually training my team on things like Lean Six Sigma, design thinking principles, like pretty robust components in order to piece all that together. And you can stitch a perfect world design thinking with lean principles and then agile development, and then you can really talk about getting speed to marketing and really getting ahead of your competitors. But it takes time, and you got to carve out the time for your team so they have that space to develop themselves, both during and after hours and what have you. But it's been a process, but they've made some pretty big strides, and then you've got to let them run and give them those stretch projects to actually do these things.
And do you lean on internal, probably a mixture, right? But where do you go to learn about ad tech, clean rooms? I mean, is that do people come in, or are you leaning on partners, like DIRECTV and Samsung and others, or are you paying someone to come in and teach you? Like, how are you approaching that? And then can you talk a little bit more, the Six Sigma and design thinking thing, can you go into that a little more too?
Well, yeah. It's really exciting this episode, if you guys are ready. So it's a little bit of everything. So sometimes we're hiring people in, we're going to do this boot camp workshop and whatever the type of thing is. Other times, a lot of it is heavy partner training. Like, I need you to get certified in Google AdWords, or I need to get certified in whatever the products are. I believe in classical training. And so, if we can fold it in, it's a former certificate or, whatever the case might be, we'll definitely do that. We didn't find a lot internal, frankly, because we're kind of subject matter experts and there's not a lot of that space. So, and even on project management and those type of things. So we've been paying for it and bringing it in-house where we can. And then, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lean Six Sigma. The way that I've applied it is I do a lot of what's called a Gemba walk. So a Gemba walk loosely translates in Japanese as go see. You're just going to go see the people actually hands on keyboard, doing the work in China, doing the work in UK. How are they doing it? Are they doing it well? Why does it take 3 days to get from step 1 to step 2? Is there a better way to do those things? And so what that does is kind of break it down and formulaic to understand like where there's opportunity, where you can share best practices, where it's like going really wrong, and kind of rebuild the infrastructure. And then you can use design thinking when you're like, in our case, rebuilding ad tech and those type of things to like, what does the customer actually want? And doing a lot of the homework around that, but in like a professional, I guess, more sophisticated way versus guts and surveys and stuff like that. And then looking about kind of lean startup or lean principles to get out market quick. MVPs, doesn't have to be perfect. Put it out there, get the feedback. I mean, Microsoft does this all the time. Why do you think the stuff never like works the half the time when they launch something? Because they're just like learning from you, and then they make it better, and then by version 7, it's awesome. So I mean, it's really around that.
So, and then when we were talking and prepping for this, you were talking a little bit about, especially as related to ad tech, the idea of you're partnering with third parties, of course, but there are some cases where you are building what you need internally. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a company our size and just scale and market, and obviously there's other multinational companies, it's really hard to find. Everybody says they're global, but they're really not. Google's not even global. You just see all the duct tape and stuff behind the scenes. In a good way, it's just everybody operates by continent and all this type of thing. So the challenge is we can't find somebody who can do everything we need, and that's okay. Everybody's a special snowflake, and everybody needs unique things. So we've been building a lot of our own tech, so much so that we might partner with somebody, grab about 30% of their tech stack, and spend a bunch of money and make it proprietary to where it's like exclusive to Marriott and is not allowed to be on the market kind of thing. And so they can't resell it, so we own that, it's proprietary, and we build it because it doesn't exist. And we just have very different challenges. We're franchised, most of our hotels are franchised, And so they're going to want to run their business. We can't legally tell them how to do it, but we can give them the tools to do that. And if we make those tools really awesome and very deep machine learning and Gen AI based, then they can make better decisions. And so we've been building a brand new platform that from the ground up, actually, for the hotels to actually go in and be able to market, do everything we're talking about here, full funnel, programmatic buying at scale, that your Atlantis hotel in Bahamas that's got money to spend, how do we help them do that better and have visibility and be able to do marketing mix model and LTV modeling and all these things that we can't do if we don't know what they're doing. Because otherwise we're like cats and they start roaming and nobody trained them to be on a leash. So, we're trying to bring them back in and building those tools. And some of it is we partner with somebody, but we usually dump a bunch of stuff and then make it our own, and then it sits off in its own instance.
So these individual franchisees have power to buy Marriott advertising locally? Is that how I'm hearing it?
They're supposed to go through our agency of record, but legally we can't dictate that because they're franchised owned. Mm-hmm. So we give a lot of guidance and some do's and don'ts and that sort of thing. But they can buy their own print, they can buy their own local TV if they have the money and some of their own stuff. But when you see it in market, it could be better. I'll just say it could be better. And so how do we give them the tools? How do you create ads at scale? Gen AI to build the ad copy, language translation, currency, all these kinds of things. So they don't have, if you're a hotel owner, you want to operate your hotels. Everybody, you guys are all staying in hotels so that the lights work, everybody's friendly, the food is fresh, all these, basic things that you need. Let them focus on that. And so you don't have to be an expert in marketing because we built this tool that just makes it super easy.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. If they're going to do it anyways, make sure they do it well. Yeah. So we've talked about some challenges, but any other big challenges that you can touch on that you're facing, and what do you hope to get solved within the next 5 years?
5, I don't even know. We can barely
1 year?
Barely see past 1 year.
6 months.
A couple things I'm just going to be super vulnerable and transparent, and I know they're recording this, but so it's all the new technology. So you've got all the clean room stuff, and it's a fancy word, and some are doing a little bit better than others, but it's hard. A lot of partners are raising their hand, even our partner Starbucks, and I want to do this, but nobody really understands how to do it. Do you even need a clean room to do that, or could you just use LiveRamp and some onboarder? And so it's just really interesting to see that and trying to figure out how to best use the technology so it's not a shiny object that actually adds value. And then, so that's a big piece that we're trying to solve for, trying to understand the changing landscape. And cookies are pretty much gone at this point anyway, but when they're really, really gone and everything's changed and the rules of the road get really difficult, then how do you just gobble up as much of that first party data as possible, but more importantly, consent and contactability? Because if you don't have permission to talk to customers, it doesn't matter how much first party data you have. And so, giving people reasons to want to tell us that they like tennis or F1 or whatever, so that we can actually be thoughtful about that information. And so that whole personalization at scale because of that is going to be pretty critical along the way. And then we talked about the brands. And so we've completely redone our customer decision journey from the ground up. We found that some hotels are like, I want to do an awareness campaign, but bookings are my primary goal. And we're like, is it though? And so, how do you bring that back and help? Because what a powerful engine that would be. If you had every franchisee, every hotel owner, everybody at corporate in the continents all saying the same thing, measuring the right things, an apple is an apple, one is one. And you're in the consumer mindset. I heard Harper was listening to the speech before this, really getting into that mindset and the persona and the stories that resonate. That gets really powerful. But you can only do that if you have the right processes and stuff like that and frameworks in place. So really building that right now, building a universal brief, tentpole calendars, things of that, so that everybody globally is actually operating as one, if you will, with nuance, of course, and what have you. But right now, it's really difficult to do that. And then the more companies you acquire, you now have to consume that, and a lot of change management goes along with that.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think all of us know that, but it seems like you guys are really putting in the work to get there.
So in cheers.
Yes. So let's end. Fun fact about Marriott.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you guys know this. It's a fun fact for sure. Does anybody know when and where the Bloody Mary was invented?
I actually do know that.
Don't answer it. It's not for you.
I didn't know that was a question, though.
Okay, so again, one of the things I learned in onboarding. So apparently the Bloody Mary was created right here in New York City at the St. Regis in 1934. So they invented the Bloody Mary. And so now every St. Regis around the world has like their own kind of take on the Bloody Mary. If you're like I was in the Maldives, they like use clam juice and, you know, like local ingredients to try to put their little spin on it. And you can buy the whole recipe book. And so if you're into Bloody Marys, or this is a really long week, so your Saturday is going to be full of Bloody Marys, could be kind of fun. But yeah, the St. Regis right here in New York City invented it. So.
Yeah, the King Cole Bar, I believe it's called, right? It's a great spot. We should pop over. I think
we can probably do a couple questions if you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we want to do any questions?
I mean, we're a couple minutes early.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Nicolette. My name is Anderson. I work at Team Snap. We partner with you on sports marketing to reach youth sports families. In terms of the engine that you're building, you talked a little bit about understanding like what types of messaging and what the creative messaging would look like. Does that also incorporate audience targeting? So if you understand that your hotel sees a lot of hockey travelers, are you able to kind of pull that in to your marketing messages? Is that kind of the agility you're looking to build?
All of the above. I personally am not designing the creative, but we do help guide them. What works, what doesn't, what's performing, best practices, that sort of thing. But you're absolutely right in trying to understand what that looks like. I think what we did differently probably in about the last 12 months is instead of just doing a bunch of brand campaigns and those type of things, we actually kind of pivoted to passions and experiences. So, I mean, the whole reason we travel, unless we have to for work, is because we're really passionate about something. We love to golf, so we're taking a golf trip. We love to ski, whatever that is. I love traveling with my family, and so you do those kinds of things. So those experiences and the passions are what you remember. Your kids are not going to remember what you bought them for a holiday last year, but they're going to remember that trip you took them on, right? And so how do you just kind of tease that out? And the best way to do that is, well, you got to ask them. You got to understand, like, what are you passionate about? If it's youth sports and that's what you're traveling for and that's what the data shows, and the data show that to us, so that's why now like Spring Hill Suites and Fairfield and those hotels that are in all these like smaller towns and around, like on every corner, like a Starbucks basically, like you can actually go there and stay there, and that's where everybody's going for their like local soccer teams and whatnot. And so how do we just make that work harder? So signing up for youth sports and making a bigger sponsorship and a partnership and those type of things. We're changing out our amenities in that hotel to, help them have a better trip for that kind of experience. So it's very important for that. And the audience piece is critical. And I want to get away from channel-led marketing. Everybody says they're doing that, but we still kind of operate sometimes that way, and be more audience-led. And the only way you're going to do that is if you are taking all those audiences, Adobe, whatever you guys are using, and you're doing that feedback loop of like, okay, well, maybe I don't go to market as a JW and a Westin and whatever. Maybe I just go to market as an audience-based plan. It's wellness. And then you have the brands show their proof points for whatever that might look like. You do some massive cool deal with Lululemon and Mira or whatever, and mindfulness, whatever that could be, but it could be really powerful. And then you know that audience works. And then you can feed that back in and start to track that. And I think that's probably like a bit more the evolution, and maybe some of you guys are already doing that and love to learn about that. But, going beyond just the typical, because even MMM, I mean, honestly, that's channel focused if we're being real with ourselves. So LTV is a better model. So.
Piggybacking off of that, I think those are really great ways to strategize. What would you say are key steps to scale that, knowing that you have different segments, different passions?
So a couple things we had to put in place, and some of them are new because we didn't really have the infrastructure to do that. So we had to get our CDP in place. We had to get our, because the data lived everywhere, and you don't want it, ideally, anybody connecting directly into your data lake and your Snowflake or whatever you use, ideally. And then you got to have your preference setter, all these passions. You got to have a way to collect it. You got to have consent. We have a way to store it, re-up it, and then bring that into the CDP so you can actually do something with it. Because the biggest thing I see on the advertising side is most companies are like, I'm going to go do this thing and build this thing, and they're only thinking about own channels and their own four walls, and they always forget about marketing and advertising. And so I'm like, well, how do I actually get that data out and do something with it? And they're like, well, we didn't really build it that way. And so, so sometimes it's after the fact. And so thinking about that, so those infrastructure pieces in place first. As far as scale, is you have to have a unified taxonomy, you have to have a unified audience strategy, clean up all the old stuff that's out there. Ideally, in a perfect world, you'd be building micro audiences in real time. The world's not quite there yet, but we'll get there. But it takes a unified process globally that everybody just has to adhere to, and you just have to have some like non-negotiables when you're talking about a global company.
One more question. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, wait for the mic, please. Thank you.
Hi, I know you said you didn't want to look 5 years down the road, but can you look into next year? I mean, I'm assuming you've already worked on your budgets for next year. So what do you see in the market consumer-wise in, this post-pandemic travel bump? And what are you seeing in media as well, besides the CTV situation?
So I think the bigger thing is connecting all the dots. So like a great example is I think we're doing a lot more now with digital out of home, especially when you think about airports, but then connecting that to in-flight entertainment, connecting that to you're leaving the airport and now we've targeted you, whether it's through mobility data with like AT&T Mobile or somebody like that, or you're buying ads through Uber and then you're tracking them all the way, you're buying the screens. So it's not even so much sequential, but you're trying to like tell the next chapter of your story. And so just I call it planning with purpose. And so that one's gonna be a little bit more. I think for the first time for us, at least, is really stop being siloed in all these different brands and starting to plan, like I said, with that audience led, that's going to be quite different. And then on the ad tech side for us is like, I'm rebuilding from scratch, like three major platforms, only two I'm going to talk about today, but this entire hotel of a marketing platform, you're talking 10,000 destinations around the world. This has to work for all of them. And so that's like no small feat. And so it's like a massive undertaking to rebuild that from scratch. And then we have an ad builder tool so that you can build in any language, currency, videos, displays, social, whatever you need to do, audio at scale in a way that can work real time, don't have to hire a production studio. Anybody with a Canvas skill can like go create an ad, and it actually works, it's brand compliant. But even more purposeful than that is connecting that ad builder tool to a DSP so that you can get that feedback loop on what's working. And before you even put it in marketing, we have another tool. We partner with CreativeX that kind of scores your creative before you even put it in market, just to kind of like give it a snuff test. And then you get that feedback loop to understand like, was it actually real, and it builds and trains the model. So it's just building this massive infrastructure on the ad tech side in order to like support all that.
I think that is all the time we have today, but thank you so much, Nicolette. Really interesting, some great feedback. Thanks, everyone.